So, a friend of mine challenged me to make one of the other more expensive types of decks under the $15 working conditions. So the commander has to be $1 or less, and the 99 of your deck can be $15 maximum. So they asked me to build Eldrazi's, because Eldrazi's are really, really expensive and known for packing a pretty penny. So we decided that Eldrazi's are gonna happen. Let's go ahead and talk about the commander that we are gonna be working with. This is Nera Wild Mage. Anytime you cast a spell, you may put it on the bottom of your library, and if you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land card, then that card gets cast for free. Then you put every revealed card that is not the one you cast on the bottom of your library. This only happens once per turn. So what are we going to be doing? Well, we are going to be casting 1-mana spells and 2-mana spells like Wayfarer's Bauble and things like Curate and Opt. And we are going to be trying to make sure that giant things like fucking Eldrazi's can come out of our deck. So let's go ahead and talk about the deck. First of all, let's talk about the big spells we are trying to get out. This is our Eldrazi and other package that we are trying to summon out from our deck. So let's go ahead and start with the big boy himself, Kozilek the Great Distortion, who, thanks to many, many reprints, is now $2.13, meaning that we even get to have a big Eldrazi Titan in the deck, not just little Eldrazi's. He says whenever you cast this spell, if you have fewer than 7 cards in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference. He's got Menace, and you get to discard a card with mana value X to counter any spell with mana value X. Basically, he's going to come into the board in the mid to late game. He's going to give you an immediate big hand refresh, and then you're going to start pummeling people to death with his giant Eldrazi Titan fists. Not that you want that, but it's going to happen anyway. Anyway, next we have Ulamog's Crusher. He's got Annihilator 2, 8/8, and he's got to attack every combat if able. This Annihilator means that anytime it swings, the player has to sacrifice 2 permanents for the grand happiness of getting pummeled and stepped on by Ulamog's tentacled face. And then we have the Pathraiser of Ulamog. It's got Annihilator 3. The same thing, but with the number 3. It also can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, so it's got triple menace. And then we've got the Eldrazi Devastator, an 8/9 trampler that will knock your opponent's health down to zilch very, very quickly. Then we have the Hand of Emrakul. You may sacrifice Eldrazi spawn to play it if you want to do that. We don't have any of that in the deck, because we're going to be playing it basically for free. It's got Annihilator 1. People are going to sack one thing. Aim this thing at the guy not playing tokens until he has to look at his lands and wonder exactly how many of them he's allowed to part with. Then we've got Desolator Twin. When it comes in, when we cast it, we get to make a 10/10 Eldrazi creature token. So we get to pay 1 mana for something like Opt, and we end up getting 20 damage on the board. It's very fair and balanced Magic the Gathering. Then we have Breaker of Armies. Every creature able to block it does so. This is functionally a board wipe in our deck. It's also very fair to cast for 2 mana. Trust me, your opponents will feel like you've played a fair game of Magic the Gathering once you play this on their turn, and then immediately swing with it on your turn. There's no need to give an Eldrazi haste if you're not summoning them on your turn anyway. Then we have the Bane of Balaged. It's basically got Annihilator 2, but it says Exile instead of Annihilator. And then we've got the Artisan of Kozilek. It's got Annihilator 2. And whenever we summon it, we can return any creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. So that's a lot of Eldrazi we managed to pack into this deck, but we've got a few other creatures in this deck that are honorary Eldrazi, like the Maelstrom Colossus. It's a 7/7 colorless creature that has Cascade, so if we manage to hit this off of Nera, we're just going to go ahead and get another card out of our deck. It can't really hit most of the Eldrazi that are in the deck, but it can hit basically any other card in our deck that's not one of the big Eldrazi. Let's talk about another honorary Eldrazi, Hulking Metalmorph. It comes in play as a copy of any artifact or creature you already have, except it gains, it has the power and toughness of whatever you play it as, either 4 mana as a 3/3 or for 9 mana as a 7/7. But you know what we're actually doing. We're just playing it for 0, basically. However, there is a benefit to this card. If you have nothing on the board that you want to play the Hulking Metalmorph on, you've got it sitting in your hand, then just play it for its prototype cost and then let Nera throw it into the deck and gamble on whatever you get out. So he's a big creature that can be cast as a small creature for purposes of what our deck wants to do. Also, the Maelstrom Colossus isn't the only way we're going to be cascading into huge cards. We also have Hit the Motherlode. Now, this broke-ass card lets us do some really funny things. It says Discover 10, which basically means we get to cascade until we find a card that has a mana value less than 10. And then, after we cast that card, we create treasure tokens equal to the difference. In the scenario where we gamble bad and we cast a 2-mana card, we make 8 treasure tokens and cast an Eldrazi Titan for that with that mana. If we gamble good and we get an Eldrazi Titan, we got an Eldrazi Titan! So we don't care either way. You don't lose with Hit the Motherlode. By the way, it can find Kozilek. Also, we have Okiva, the Enigma Goliath. It's got 6/6 flying and ward 3 and making people pay 3 life. This thing will close out games on its own. And anytime you cast a non-creature spell, which by the way is all the time in this deck, make a number of Phyrexian goblin creatures equal to the mana value of the spell, and they gain haste. So even if we start gambling badly on all of our spell casts, we still start creating a bigger and bigger board of senseless violence. Then we have the Diluvian Primordial. Every time it enters the battlefield, for every opponent, grab an instant or sorcery from their graveyard and cast it without paying its mana cost. You don't need to look for good win cons in your deck. I'm pretty sure your opponents have built pretty good decks, so just take their win cons. That's perfectly fine. These are the big spells of the deck. But don't worry, we've got something else. We've got the funny spells. These are the more funny ha-has of the deck. They're big hits, but don't worry, they're gonna do some silly things for here. Here's Etali Primal Storm, another honorary Eldrazi for us. Whenever it attacks, we get to exile the top card of everybody's library, and then we get to cast any of those spells without paying their mana costs. Note, that counts for us too. Also, what's better than 1 Eldrazi? 2 Eldrazi, or if we finish the initiative, 3 Eldrazi. Tomb of Horrors Adventurers. Tomb of Horrors Adventure says that anytime it enters the battlefield, we take the initiative, because I had to sneak in doing dungeons somehow. You know I had to do it. We didn't have a choice here. The Tomb of Horrors Adventure also says whenever you cast your second spell, which, by the way, is every spell ever, because Nera auto-casts your second spell, we get to copy it. Twice if we've completed a dungeon, which we will, because who's gonna fucking attack us? Who's gonna throw creatures? Who wants to throw hands with the Eldrazi player? Who has that kind of power? Not the people at your play table, I can tell you that. Then we have the Sunbird's Invocation. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library where X is its mana value. Cast any spell with mana value X from among those cards. So if we cast a 1-mana spell, we look at 1 card and cast another 1-mana spell if it happens to be there. If we cast a 10-mana spell, like an Eldrazi, then we look at the top 10 cards and cast any other 10-mana or lower spell from those cards. This, if not answered, will allow us to build the biggest board with all of the stupidest cards. Then we have the Jin Illuminatus. Each instant and sorcery spell we play has Replicate. The Replicate cost is equal to its mana cost. So here's what you're going to do. If this comes out from your gamble with Nera, then you sit on it for a second, and then you go, I need some cards in my hand. I'm going to cast Quicken. The next sorcery spell I cast this turn has Flash, but I am the big Eldrazi deck, so I've got lots of spare mana and no cards in hand. Whatever will I do with that spare mana? I guess I'll just replicate that Quicken about 5 or 6 times and just draw a fresh new hand. I wasn't using the mana anyway, and my first one basically went into my deck for free, so I guess we're just going to be getting a bunch of free cards here. This, along with Sunbird's Invocation, creates a scenario where our opponent has to answer these cards on the board, and not the giant Eldrazi that are knocking down their door and giving them nightmares. Oh, by the way, we also have Chaos Wand. We can make an opponent exile the top card of their library until they hit an instant or sorcery, then we can cast it without paying its mana cost. So here's what this is going to do. Let's say we exhaust our hand, because we don't have a ton of draw in this deck, not actual draw power. So we play Chaos Wand. Who the hell needs our own instants and sorceries to trigger Nera when we can use somebody else's instants and sorceries to trigger Nera? We don't need to play good cards. Our opponents have put good cards in their deck, and we like their cards. Then we have Wizard's Spellbook. Exile an instant or sorcery from any graveyard. Again, anybody's. Roll a d20. Either copy that card and cast it for its mana cost if you roll a 1 through 9. If you roll a 10 through 19, pay a colorless mana to cast that card instead. And if you hit 20, copy every card with it that you've copied with it and just play them all at once. 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to hit 1 through 9 or 10 to 19. So you're just going to be using this to go, hey, you've got a nice 1-mana instant in your graveyard. I would like to activate that as my first card per turn. put it under your library. Go ahead. I mean, whether or not you're able to do that when Wizard Spellbook is already exiling it, yeah, sucks to be you. You're not getting that card back. But I'm going to cost the copy. And as a result, I'm just going to get free stuff. I'm just going to get all the free stuff. We're just going to gamble a bunch of times without spending a whole lot of mana. Then we have the threefold Gearfolk. You've probably seen this thing show up in a lot of my decks recently. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it gets 3/1/1 counters, and whenever it attacks, you can create a number of 1/1 colorless gnome tokens equal to its power. That also happens when it ETBs. Then we can sacrifice artifacts to give it 1/1 counter. So here's what you're going to do. Threefold Gearfolk comes onto the Gearhulk. Yeah, threefold Thunderhulk, those are the words, comes onto the battlefield with the Nera effect. We're going to drop him onto the board, we spawn our gnome tokens, and then we wait a turn cycle. Our turn comes up, we're not going to spend mana on cards because we cast 1 and 2 mana spells to get things out of our deck. We don't actually cast any of our big cards for the most part, so we're just going to sack all of the gnomes to make him a 6/6. And then we're going to punch somebody in the nose with our 6/6 creature, spawning a bunch of colorless gnome tokens. So every single turn that we have spare mana, which will be a lot of turns because we don't really spend a lot of our mana in this deck, we get to make the threefold Thunderhulk bigger and then make our army of gnomes bigger so that we can block whatever we want, and we keep on exponentially increasing this number until we have a bafflingly large colorless creature on the board with an army behind him because it's fair Magic the Gathering. Speaking of fair, you know what's great? Copying cards. Swarm Intelligence, this can come off of Nera as well. We don't have to just get Eldrazi. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can copy that spell. So let's say that you are running out of cards in your deck. So you are wondering, I've got this Deliberate in my deck. It's going to scry 2 and then draw me a card if I actually cast it, and I need to find some better cards in my deck. But I want to throw it to the bottom and gamble with Nera. So, hey, I've got you. You're going to cast Deliberate, and then Nera's going to throw the first Deliberate you cast into your deck. Then you're going to, after getting your Eldrazi or whatever you get from the top of your deck, there's a second Deliberate waiting in the stack that's going to happen. Then you get your draw. You're going to be able to get a shit ton of free spells and keep on doing the thing your deck wants to do. But I've talked a lot about the top of your deck. How are we actually going to make sure that the Eldrazi make it on top of our deck? Well, that's pretty simple. We've got a few cards that allow us to manipulate the top of our deck, starting with Witching Well. It's a 1-mana spell that lets us scry 2. If we really want to manipulate the top of our deck, we can play it and then sack it for drawing cards. Or it's a 1-mana card we can let Nera throw into our deck for reasons. Then we've got Index. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put them back in any order. So we can play Index on our turn, put something like Atali up on the top of the library, wait until it's the end of our opponent's turn, cast something like Quicken, and then immediately throw it into the deck, knowing that we've placed something like Atali on the top. Then, where's my Atali? Where is he? Where's my good boy? There he is. This allows us to basically cheat, because cheating is fair in Magic the Gathering so long as Wizards of the Coast printed it on cards. Then we have Johan, Apprentice Sorcerer. Look at the top card of your library at any time, so we get to predict what we're going to get. If we know that there's an Eldrazi sitting up there, then we're just going to go, yeah, I'm going to cast Opt now, because I know I'm going to get an Eldrazi. But if you've got an instant or sorcery up there, you can cast it from the top of your library instead. So we don't even have to touch the cards in our hand to trigger Nera. Then we've got Melchizedek Paragon. He does the same thing, basically, except he says, play with the top of the card revealed. Whenever you cast the inner sorcery from the top, though, you also get to copy it. So again, just like with Deliberate, we get to have a version of the card waiting in the stack that allows us to draw cards. Then we have Temporal Anchor. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to scry 2. Whenever you choose to put 1 or more cards on the bottom of your library, exile that many cards from the bottom of your library, and during your turn, you can play any cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. So, we scry with the Temporal Anchor. We know that we've got an Eldrazi and an instant up top. We're going to keep the cards exactly as they are, so we draw the instant, play it, and get the Eldrazi. Or we look at the top 2 and see that, oh, these are duds that I don't care about. I'm going to put them both on the bottom of the library, which is going to exile them, and then I'm going to cast one of those duds from the exile zone to put it back on the bottom of the library with Nera and get one of my big cards out for free. This deck has a lot of ways of just playing cards for free and cheating. But it's the kind of cheating that's okay because it's in the rulebook. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to be getting all of those lovely cards onto the board. We have a 12-card dense ramp section that's a little bit unique. Of course, we've got mainstays like Commander Sphere, Fire Diamond, Sky Diamond, Wayfarer's Bauble, Prismatic Lens, Ornithopter of Paradise, Mirror Convert, and Mind Stone, which are all basically decent mana rocks that you can run on or off a budget. Then we have Honored Heirloom as a way to tell reanimation players to please stop playing and cheating cards. We are the ones that get to cheat cards into play. We also have things like Worn Power Stone and Hedron Archive, because sometimes we want to hardcast our Eldrazi. It's not going to happen often, but we do want some mana rocks that can accelerate us that far, because those Eldrazi are big, and if we can just start playing them from our hands later in the game, all is well. If we also need to sack the Hedron Archive for draws, we have that ability. Then we have Seer's Lantern. Not a great mana rock normally, but in this deck, it's actually pretty amazing, because it's a 3-mana mana rock that we can pay 2 mana into and tap to scry 1. So this allows us to constantly peek at the top of our deck to go, huh, I wonder if I'm going to see an Eldrazi soon. I wonder if I'm going to be able to cast Kozilek yet. I don't like the card that's on top. I'm going to throw it to the bottom and try again in a bit. It allows you to get duds off the top of your deck. It allows you to get different cards enabled in your deck. Seer's Lantern, pretty good in this deck. Then we have a removal and interaction section that's not as big as I normally would like, but that's okay because we have the big Eldrazi that are also acting as pseudo removal. So let's start with everybody's favorite Tidespout Tyrant, a fair and balanced Magic the Gathering card if I've ever seen one. Whenever you cast a spell, you can return any permanent to its owner's hand. Yeah. This is a perfectly fair, balanced, and reasonable Magic the Gathering card. I've never heard of anybody getting salty about Tidespout Tyrant being on a board and resetting them over and over again when they play their 1 and 2 mana spells. Then we have Steel Hellkite. You can pay 2 mana to give it power. That's not really important. What's important is we can blow up every non-land permanent a player has that has mana value X, where whose controller was dealt combat by Steel Hellkite. So we can attack somebody, pay mana into it, and go, huh, I pay 2 mana, all your mana rocks are gone. Oops, I'm sorry. I figured you weren't gonna let the giant mechanical steel dragon hit you, but the deck's $14. I'm not really playing unfair Magic. Then we have Magnetic Force. At the beginning of every upkeep, deal 3 damage to every target. We can use this to put a clock on everybody, or we can use this to make sure that every creature with a booty of 3 knows that this is not the place or time for it to exist, and life sucks for it and it alone. Then we have Magnetic Giant. Whenever it comes into play, it deals 2 damage to every creature and each player. This will hit nothing in our deck, and it will completely board wipe the tokens player. It's his problem for playing tokens. We're playing Eldrazi. We want to eat all of their cards. We don't want them sacrificing tokens for our Annihilator triggers. That doesn't make us feel good. So we're going to wipe their tokens away so that they have to actually eat our Annihilator triggers like a real man. Then we have Duplicant. The only relevant text on this card is it exiles a creature. This will get rid of your indestructible problems. Then we have Brynolin, the Moonkraken. Anytime we cast a spell with converted mana cost 6 or greater, which this deck is mostly made out of, you may return any non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Basically, consider this your extra copy of Tidespout Tyrant. And then, of course, we have Meteor Golem, because we're going to be paying basically no mana for Meteor Golem. And when Meteor Golem comes into the board, nobody can feel bad about losing a card to Meteor Golem. It's a bad card that came in every precon in the history of Magic the Gathering. Why would you be mad about this bad card that came out of every precon, ruining your strategy? It can't possibly do that. It's a bad card in every precon. It's not good. It's not a good Magic the Gathering card. Never run this card, except in every deck that can cheat it out ever and abuse it ever. Then we have the small spell package. These are all of our little enablers that are not our mana rocks. Oh, by the way, remember that Nera can actually activate off of a mana rock. That's a thing that she can do. We have a little chat. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand, the other on the bottom of your library. It has casualty 1. So if we have one of our creatures that spawns tokens out, we can just sack one of those tokens and make sure that little chat is going to sit on the stack, giving us access to a draw while also going into the bottom of the deck and letting us gamble. Anticipate lets us look at the top 3 cards of our deck, put one into our hand and the rest on the bottom of the library any order, or again, just go away to Nera. Curate, surveil 2, and then draw a card. So this will allow us another instance of manipulating the top of our deck if we need it to. Deliberate, scry 2, then draw a card. Yet another instance of deck top manipulation we have access to. Quicken says the next instant or sorcery spell you play has flash. The most relevant bit on this card, though, for us is that it's a card that we can play for 1 mana to draw a card. Or, you know, in most cases, it's just not going to do that at all. It's just going to be thrown into the bottom of the deck. Like with Opt, which lets us scry 1 and draw 1. Or it just goes to the bottom of the deck and becomes an Eldrazi. Impulse lets us look at the top 4 cards of our library, put 1 into our hand, the rest from the bottom of the library at any order. Which is a wonderful sentiment if it wasn't also just an Eldrazi. Then we have Glimpse of Freedom. Lets us draw a card, but it also has Escape. We can play it anytime we want from the graveyard. So we play this early on to get it in the grave and get a nice draw out of it, dig through our deck a little bit, make sure we've got some more mana rocks coming, and then later in the game we go, hey, I'm going to pay 3 mana and Nera's going to just throw it onto the bottom of the deck. And it's going to become an Eldrazi. Oops. Then we have Refocus. Untap a creature and then draw a card. You can use this as a fun politics piece if somebody's got something like a Savala out. You can go, hey, do you want more mana from your Savala? Don't hit me for a couple turns and I can give you a huge mana boost. Or this just becomes an Eldrazi. Sleight of Hand lets us look at the top 2 cards of our library, put 1 into our hand, the other at the bottom. Or it becomes an Eldrazi. Supreme Will is the only counterspell we're running in the deck, and the reason this is in the deck is because if we accidentally hit this off Nera, we actually can just use its second ability of looking at the top 4 cards of our library, putting any one of them into our hand, and the rest on the bottom in any order. The only reason that we are running this one is we still want to have access to the ability to counterspell because we are in blue, but we don't want to run basic counterspells because basic counterspells, when they get flipped off of Nera, just fizzle. We don't want Nera to have fizzles. We want everything that Nera hits to be a live card, regardless of how powerful that live card might be. And then we have Telling Time. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, 1 on the bottom, 1 on the top, and 1 on the bottom. So look at the top cards, go, there's an instant I won in my hand, an Eldrazi I won on top, and a dud I won on the bottom. Now I'm going to pass turn to my opponent. The first card I cast on their turn is that Eldrazi, and then boom, they're going to have the absolute worst day in the entire world. Now, on their turn, they got to stare down a Titan. And that's not my problem, that's their problem. They chose to get in this game of Magic the Gathering. Then we have the ways we're going to be replenishing cards in our hand. We have actually a little bit of a draw engine. We only have 5 dedicated draw pieces because so many of our cards have incremental draw. We have Kemster's Insight, which lets us draw 2 cards and then has Jumpstart. So the first time we have this card in our hand, we're going to cast it normally. We have to cast it before the curve of our commander comes out anyway, so why not? Cast it, draw 2 cards, get your hand to be bigger, and then jumpstart it later in the game and throw it under the bottom and make it become an Eldrazi. Then we have the Fact or Fiction card, which reveal the top 5 cards of our library, give them to an opponent. They get a bad choice between them. Hand them to our opponent, and then they hand us the piles, and we go, one of these piles has all of my Eldrazi enablers, and the other one doesn't. See, the fun thing about this card is in most games of Magic, a person who is presented with the Fact or Fiction ability generally knows the way that they need to put their cards to hand to you so that you are at a disadvantage as the Fact or Fiction player. But because we are playing Nera, and heck, if we even know what's going to come up the top of our deck, this card actually does a lot of work for us because our opponents have no idea how to handle what our deck's doing because we don't even know what we're casting half the time. This is a hilarious play in a deck like this. Jory N says whenever you cast your second spell each turn, draw a card, which is kind of easy to do in a deck that only ever casts 2 spells a turn. Wavebreak Hippocamp says when you cast your first spell on every opponent's turn, draw a card, which again is easy to do in a deck that is trying to cast 1 spell on every player's turn and turn it into a turn cycle thing. I don't know why my thing just clicked away. That's weird. I hit a back button. Anyway, back to Nera. Remember, when we cast a spell, if it's the first one we cast in a turn, we get to reveal cards from the top of our library until we hit a non-land card. That's going to be any of these guys, 9 times out of 10. But the last draw card we have is the Mirror of Galadriel. Not only is this a low mana card that we can cast to gamble with our Eldrazi, but if we keep it on the board, we can tap it to scry 1 and then draw a card, and this ability costs 1 less for every legendary creature we control. Generally speaking, we're going to have Nera out on the board, so this will usually say scry 1, draw 1 for 4. This normally would not be the best card in a deck outside of a legendary Kindred deck, but because uniquely we are playing a deck that doesn't give a flying crap about its mana pool, we can sink mana into this card to keep our hand nice and healthy. It doesn't actually hurt us all that much, because, again, we're not spending full mana on most of our cards. But that leaves us with the mana section. I haven't sorted the mana section because I was a little excited to talk about this deck. I like Eldrazi, I'm sorry. So let's get into it. We have Grey Havens and Crystal Grotto as and the Temple of Epiphany, which are all lands that give us the ability to scry, which is very important for this kind of deck. Then we have Evolving Wilds, Shire Terrace, Promising Veins, and Terramorphic Expanse as ways to make sure that we have access to every land type in our deck. Then we have the Surtland Frostspire. This is a board wipe on a land. This card does insane work for us. Not only does this card give us access to one of the most important things in Magic, scrying, in a deck that cares about its top deck, this also lets us deal 2 damage to every creature. This is the type of card that's very important in a deck that's trying to deal with plenty of Eldrazi triggers. We want our Annihilator triggers to kill only good cards. We don't want it to hit tokens, so we can sack a land to blow up every token. It's a very, very funny card in this deck. We also have Myriad Landscape as another way of getting lands out of the deck. It also mana ramps us because it gets 2 of any type. And then we have 2 very special lands, 2 lands that are close to my heart. Hidden Cataract and Hidden Volcano. These may come into the battlefield tapped, but again, in a deck like this, we can handle more tap lands than normal because we don't care about our mana anywhere near as much as we do in other decks. We are cheating 90% of the time. We can crack it to discover 4, and we activate that only as a sorcery, but we can discover 4, which guarantees that we will hit one of our smaller cards, and then once we hit that card, we can then choose with Nera if we want to keep the card or gamble for an Eldrazi off of it. This means that even our land base is working to make sure that we get big titans on the board and we start making people sacrifice all of their most important cards. Because we, again, play fair Magic the Gathering, and we want our opponents to have fair Magic the Gathering played with them, because they deserve to have a fair game, which is why we're playing Desolation Twin for 2 mana, because it's fair. We're playing Breaker of Armies for 1 mana, because it's fair. And Artisan of Kozilek is coming down for 4 mana, because it's fair. So I hope you guys enjoyed Nera Wildmage giving you the most random and, again, fair form of Magic the Gathering you possibly could play. I have no idea what spells are coming out of my deck. How could I possibly be playing the overpowered deck? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I was super excited to play to show this one off. So, as always, everybody, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Instant end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. And they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.